Have you ever wondered what happens inside a federal complex in the exact second everything goes wrong? And what unfolds when the person everyone suspects is the only one who can stop the disaster? Most of all, what if the most dangerous operative in the building is the one locked behind a sealed door? The alarms erupted before anyone understood the threat. Fluorescent lights burst awake with a violent hum, shaking dust from the vents as if the entire structure anticipated a blow that had not yet landed.
Before you learn my story, help us grow. Subscribe to the channel.
On the lower level, Agent Rhodes moved like a storm carving its own path. His jaw was clenched, his stride sharp, and his ego bruised by an operation collapsing faster than he could patch its faults. Weeks of planning had dissolved in 16 chaotic minutes, and he needed someone to blame. He found her standing near the freight elevator, still, silent, unmoved by the noise hammering the halls. The alarms painted her face in sharp red pulses, yet she displayed no panic, no confusion, no attempt to explain herself. Her calm taunted him. She looked like a civilian, but civilians trembled, civilians questioned, civilians begged for clarity. She did none of those things. Rhodes seized her arm and pulled her through the corridor. She did not resist. She walked with him as if she had already mapped every corner of the building. He demanded her name. She offered nothing. He scanned her badge, but the system glitched and returned no file. To him, it confirmed that she was trouble. He wanted a suspect. He wanted control. She was the perfect vessel for his frustration. He forced her inside the secure room, slammed the door, and listened for the reassuring hiss of the magnetic seal. From the other side, he told her he would destroy her life if she had anything to do with the breach. He believed his threat mattered. He believed he was the one holding authority. Inside the room, she surveyed every screw, hinge, and panel. Her fingertips brushed the metal table. Her breathing was steady, intentional, controlled. She listened to footsteps beyond the door, measuring weight, pace, and pattern. She filed away each detail. She had been in worse rooms. She had escaped deeper traps. The fluorescent ceiling light bothered her more than the imprisonment. Chaos spread through the main floor. Systems shut down. Communications blinked out. Security grids collapsed into static. Rhodes barked orders, but the distortion in the headsets swallowed his voice. He felt the disaster tightening around him and clung to a single belief. The woman he locked away was connected to the breach. It was the only narrative that soothed his ego. A junior analyst approached with corrupted logs, unauthorized access, location flagged. The coordinates pointed to the exact corridor where Rhodes had found her. He felt vindicated. He believed he had caught the saboteur. He felt certain he had prevented something worse. He did not know that she was the only person who could stop the attack. He did not know she had arrived on a classified mandate far beyond his clearance. He did not know she had already identified the internal weakness that allowed the breach. He did not know she operated under protocols invisible to his entire division. He did not know she was Black Ops. On the security feed, her image flickered. She stood in the center of the room, eyes closed, as if listening for a frequency only she had been trained to detect. A tremor rippled through the walls. Rhodes ignored it. The building did not. If you want the next chapter of this investigation, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. The situation was shifting faster than the agents realized. While they scrambled to restore control, deeper threats moved in silence. She counted each second, aware that timing determined survival. Nothing about the breach was accidental. She had been sent for a reason, and soon the entire facility would understand why. Now. She waited in controlled silence, aware the breach was a calculated opening. Her task was not escape, but timing, choosing the precise moment to reveal who truly held power all along. The breach did not begin with the alarms. It began 12 minutes earlier, in a forgotten maintenance corridor, where a single access panel blinked in an unusual rhythm. Most agents ignored such details during routine sweeps, but she had noticed immediately. The pattern was too controlled to be random, and too quiet to be accidental. It was the kind of signal used by people who understood how to hide in plain sight. While Rhodes believed he was dragging a suspect into custody, she had already mapped the threat threads webbing across the facility. Inside the secure room, she listened to the building breathe. The vents whispered. The fluorescent light hummed. The magnetic seals pulsed at predictable intervals. All these details formed a familiar pattern, something she had been trained to read long before she ever stepped into government service. She was not waiting for someone to rescue her. She was waiting for the exact moment when the real attack would reveal itself. On the main floor, chaos intensified. Agents with half-working radios sprinted through corridors hunting for answers. Rhodes stood at the center of the operations hub, attempting to command order from a room sliding into confusion. His voice carried the sharp edge of someone who feared professional collapse more than actual danger. Every malfunction increased his desperation to prove he had detained the correct suspect. The junior analyst returned with corrupted data logs. The files showed intrusions spreading like fractures through the system. Rhodes scanned the information with growing frustration. He saw what he wanted to see, a timeline that matched her presence. He ignored the indications that the breach came from somewhere deeper. He demanded more data that supported his belief. Down the hall, technicians struggled to reboot the communication grid. Their screens flashed static. A strange interference blocked every channel. Someone had severed the facility's external lines with precision. No enemy without classified knowledge could operate with this accuracy. She understood that. Rhodes did not. Inside the secure room, she tilted her head to the shift in airflow. The temperature dropped by a fraction of a degree. The pressure shifted. She recognized the signature. Someone had rerouted the air system to test structural integrity. It was a standard precursor to a full internal lockdown. She closed her eyes and traced the pattern. The breach was moving quickly. Rhodes paced the operations hub with agitation. He shouted for updates and ordered lockdown protocols that the failing network refused to execute. Every command met resistance from a compromised system. Yet he clung to the belief that securing the suspect was enough. A senior agent approached with one piece of information: a list of personnel with clearance above Rhodes. Her name was on it. He dismissed the revelation as a clerical error, insisting she had forged credentials. The senior agent warned him to verify the clearance. Rhodes refused. Another tremor moved through the building. The lights flickered, and a low mechanical groan echoed from the sublevels. The breach had reached the power grid. She recognized the sound instantly. The attackers were escalating. She stepped toward the door, counting seconds. The facility was entering the second phase of compromise. Most agents believed they faced a cyber attack, but she knew better. The attackers wanted control of something hidden beneath the complex, something few personnel knew existed. She had been sent to prevent exactly this scenario. Rhodes had obstructed her mission, and now the building paid the price. She looked up at the flickering light. The timing was tightening. The breach was almost ready to expose its real objective. She stood in the center of the room, steady and prepared. The next phase would begin any moment, and when it did, every agent would learn that the woman Rhodes locked away was the only person capable of stopping what came next. She inhaled slowly as the floor vibrated again, aware that precision mattered more than force. The attackers had calculated every weakness in the structure, but they had overlooked the one variable impossible to predict. She had studied this facility for months, memorizing its flaws, its blind spots, and its hidden infrastructure. She knew where the breach would strike first. The third tremor was not subtle. It rolled through the federal complex like pressure traveling through a steel spine, vibrating every surface before fading into a low mechanical hum. Most agents mistook it for a generator fluctuation. She knew better. Structural vibrations at that frequency came from forced rerouting of underground systems. The attackers were preparing to access the sublevels, and time was collapsing around everyone who failed to understand it. Inside the secure room, she focused on the rhythm of the building. The air vents now pulsed at irregular intervals. The power grid attempted to compensate for a breach it could not isolate. Lights dimmed in uneven patterns. These signs were familiar to her. echoes of operations she had participated in years earlier, missions buried under layers of classification that Rhodes would never read. She stepped closer to the door and let her fingertips hover near the magnetic seal. It was weakening. Above her, Rhodes struggled to maintain authority as the operations hub deteriorated. The large central screen flickered between static and fractured system maps. Analysts shouted over one another, trying to identify the origin points of the breach. Every minute brought new failures. Doors locked without commands. Cameras blinked out. Temperature controls spiraled. Rhodes demanded status updates no one could provide. A senior operations officer approached him with a grim expression. Power fluctuations had spread to the sublevels, and automated protocols were overriding human input. The facility was preparing for a total lockdown. Rhodes insisted this confirmed that the suspect in the secure room was responsible. The officer disagreed. The timeline made no sense. The pattern of the breach was too deliberate, too synchronized. Rhodes refused to listen. Down the corridor, technicians attempted to force a manual reboot of the communication grid. Sparks erupted from a panel, showering the floor with fragments of melted insulation. A technician fell backward, coughing as smoke drifted upward. Someone shouted for a fire suppressant, but the system remained unresponsive. The suppression nozzles were locked by the same invisible intruder controlling the network. In the secure room, she turned her head to a faint clicking sound traveling through the ventilation shaft. The pattern was coded. A message. She recognized it instantly. It was a field signal used only by Black Ops units operating without external support. Someone inside the building was attempting to warn her. The signal came from sub-level 3. The attackers were already there. She closed her eyes, mapping the facility from memory. Sub-level 3 housed unlisted storage, armored data vaults, and one chamber intentionally hidden from standard schematics. Very few knew what it stored. Fewer still knew why it was dangerous. She had been briefed 3 days earlier. Her mission had been simple: ensure no unauthorized entity accessed that chamber. Rhodes had unknowingly locked her away from the one place she needed to reach. Another tremor shifted the room slightly. The magnetic seal on the door weakened further. She stepped back, assessing the structure. The attackers were drawing enormous power from the grid. They were preparing to open something beneath the complex. She did not need her tools to escape. The attackers would open the door for her soon enough. On the upper levels, Rhodes finally heard something he could not ignore. An analyst reported that the facility's lockdown protocols had been activated externally, not internally. Rhodes froze. For the first time, he understood that someone was controlling the complex from a position the agency could not see. The breach was not random. It was a coordinated infiltration. He demanded the secure room be reinforced, convinced the suspect inside was part of the attack. A technician warned him that the magnetic seals were destabilizing. Rhodes ordered manual locks, but the command system refused to accept input. The network ignored him as if he did not exist. In the secure room, the overhead lights dimmed until only a thin halo remained. She sensed the shift she had been waiting for. The attackers were initiating the next phase. She measured her breaths, calming her heartbeat to a steady rhythm. The lock clicked, not loudly, but with a whisper of metal releasing under remote override. A soft pulse traveled through the wall. The door slid open by 3 inches. She did not move immediately. She listened. Voices were approaching. Not Rhodes, not agents. Their footsteps were deliberate, synchronized, and too quiet to belong to anyone unfamiliar with infiltration. She stepped away from the door, positioning herself at the one angle the approaching men could not immediately see. The moment the footsteps stopped outside, she understood the truth. The attackers were not coming to breach the room. They were coming to extract her. The door opened only a few inches, but it was enough. A cold draft from the corridor slipped into the secure room, carrying the faint metallic scent of the facility's lower ventilation shafts. She remained motionless, her breath steady, her body positioned at an angle that concealed her from the line of sight of whoever approached. Silence tightened around her like a drawn wire. 3 shadows moved in the hallway. They did not speak. They did not hesitate. Their steps were precise and evenly spaced, the unmistakable rhythm of a trained unit. She watched the faint shift of light near the floor as their boots aligned with the doorway. These were not agents from the facility. Their presence carried the signature of operatives accustomed to hostile extractions. Everything about their approach told her one thing. They knew exactly who she was. The door slid open another inch. A hand appeared, gloved in matte black material designed to absorb light. It reached toward the door controls, bypassing the interface with a compact device that hissed as it melted through the final magnetic seal. The lock failed with a soft click. The door eased open, and the first figure stepped inside. He wore no identifying marks, no insignia, no tactical patches. His gear was silent, layered, and efficient. His visor hid his eyes, but the tension in his posture revealed that he expected resistance from whoever stood inside. His head turned slightly as he scanned the room. It took him half a second to register that she was not where he had expected her to be. She moved before he could react, sweeping behind him with silent precision. Her intent was not to neutralize him yet. She needed information. She needed to understand whether these operatives were here to assist her or remove her. The second figure stepped inside, forcing her to shift position. She blended into the dim corner as the door widened another few inches. In the corridor, two more unidentified operatives waited. Their presence confirmed the scale of the infiltration. This was not an opportunistic attack. It was planned, coordinated, executed with knowledge of the facility's architecture and the vulnerabilities in its response protocols. They had exploited Rhodes's mistake to gain access to her. The first operative spoke softly into his communicator. His voice was filtered, almost mechanical. The corridor hummed with interference. The signal was not from inside the facility's network. It was external. She recognized the frequency modulation. Whoever commanded these operatives had access to technology that did not appear on any government inventory. The second operative activated a small scanner. A beam of blue light swept across the room. When it landed on the metal table where she had placed her hand earlier, the scanner emitted a confirming beep. They had been tracking her fingerprints. That meant they knew precisely who she was. The third operative stepped inside and closed the door, sealing the four of them in the narrow space. She remained invisible in the shadows, but she knew she could not wait much longer. Every second narrowed the window before the attackers advanced deeper into the sublevels. She needed to break their formation, identify their directives, and move towards the lower levels before the entire facility collapsed under the breach. The first operative approached the center of the room and lowered his weapon. He reached into a pocket and produced a small card. The moment he placed it on the table, she understood everything. The card was blank, but the texture was unmistakable. It was a Black Ops identification substrate, used only in silent recalls. No agency outside the highest classification tier had any reason to carry one. They were not here to capture her. They were here to extract her. But extraction did not always mean rescue. She stepped out of the shadows. The operatives stiffened, but did not move toward their weapons. The first one turned his visor toward her and tilted his head. It was a gesture not of challenge, but acknowledgement. He tapped the communicator on his wrist. A filtered voice crackled through the distorted signal. The words were not clear, but the meaning was unmistakable. She was being summoned. She approached the table and touched the identification substrate. Heat pulsed through it, activating the embedded layer. Unreadable information shimmered across its surface before fading back to blank. The operative closest to her stepped aside, opening a path to the door. She understood now. Whatever was happening beneath the facility had escalated beyond standard containment. She was no longer an observer or a hidden safeguard. She was required. The extraction team waited for her decision. She took one step forward, and the entire complex went dark. The darkness fell without warning. One moment, the emergency lighting flickered above them. The next, the facility plunged into a silence so complete it felt engineered. Even the constant hum of the ventilation system vanished, replaced by a nothingness that pressed against the walls like a held breath. For a few seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. The absence of sound was more alarming than any alarm. Somewhere in the sublevels, a deep metallic crack echoed upward, vibrating through the reinforced structure. It was not an explosion. It was the sound of a lock engaging, a lock built into the foundation long before most of the current agents had been hired. She recognized the resonance instantly. The attackers had reached their target. Inside the secure room, the extraction team pivoted into a defensive formation. Their visors switched to internal displays, glowing faintly as they adjusted to the blackout. She did not require enhanced vision. She listened instead, letting the vibrations in the floor guide her understanding of the situation. The darkness had been triggered by an external override. Someone had forced the facility into deep shutdown mode. Once activated, only a handful of individuals could reverse it. She was one of them. The lead operative raised a hand, signaling the others to hold position. A faint red light pulsed across his visor. A silent message. Extraction protocols remained active, even under blackout conditions. But the shift in the facility's atmosphere told her something else. The attackers were not only confident, they were ahead. The door to the secure room released with a slow, mechanical groan. Backup systems attempted to resist the override, but the attackers had bypassed them entirely. The corridor outside was a tunnel of darkness, deeper and heavier than the blackout itself. Somewhere down the hall, faint metallic clicks echoed in an irregular rhythm. The pattern was unfamiliar, and that alone made it dangerous. She stepped towards the doorway, her movements measured. She needed to reach sub-level 3, where the hidden chamber was located. The longer the attackers remained unopposed, the more irreversible their progress became. The extraction team formed a perimeter around her and moved with controlled precision into the corridor. The darkness was disorienting for most, but she navigated by sound. Each step, each shift of weight, each distant vibration told her where the attackers were moving. They were not advancing chaotically. They were following a map. One they should not possess. On the main floor, Rhodes struggled to regain control. The operations hub was pitch black, except for a few blinking indicators on dead consoles. Agents shouted for flashlights, weapons, and confirmation that anyone still held command. Rhodes forced his way through the confusion, demanding reports that no one could give. He refused to believe the situation was beyond recovery. He refused to accept that he had made a mistake that compromised the entire facility. He reached for the secure room feed, forgetting that the blackout had already severed the system. He slammed his hand against the console, convinced that the suspect was responsible for everything happening. He ordered a full lockdown of all sublevels, unaware that the commands were being rerouted and discarded by an intruder with far greater authority than he possessed. In the corridor below, she and the extraction team advanced slowly. The air grew colder the deeper they moved. Emergency panels attempted to activate, but flickered out again under the external control of the attackers. The sound of distant machinery shifting echoed from the sublevels. The pressure in the air thickened. Sub-level 3 was nearing a critical transition. Halfway down the corridor, she signaled the team to stop. The floor beneath them vibrated with a pattern she recognized. 3 pulses. A pause. 2 pulses. Another pause. It was a detonation sequence, not for explosives, but for access. The attackers were forcing open the chamber. She quickened her pace. The extraction team followed, adjusting formation. They did not question her direction. They did not need verbal confirmation. Her movements told them everything they needed to know. She was no longer a detainee. She was now the operative in command of the response. As they reached the stairwell leading to sub-level 3, a wave of cold air rose to meet them. The attackers had breached the outer layer of the chamber. She stepped onto the metal grate and descended, her mind calculating every second remaining before the threshold failed completely. When she reached the landing, she paused. The lights below flickered once. Then the chamber door exploded outward in a burst of white steam. The attackers had opened it, and whatever they were after was no longer contained. The burst of white steam rolled through the sub-level corridor like a low creeping fog, swallowing every outline and softening the harsh metallic angles of the structure. The temperature dropped fast, stealing warmth from the air with unnatural precision. She descended the final steps with the extraction team behind her, each member adjusting their visors to compensate for the sudden environmental shift. She did not need digital assistance. She recognized the effect immediately. The chamber had not been breached by force. It had been opened through its own internal protocol. Something inside had recognized the attackers as authorized, which should have been impossible. The steam thinned enough to reveal the shattered remains of the chamber's outer seal. Thick metal fragments lay scattered across the floor, each piece sliced cleanly, as if by a controlled field rather than a physical tool. The interior lights flickered in slow, deliberate intervals, illuminating the chamber in pale flashes that exposed more questions than answers. A faint hum vibrated from within. It was steady, rhythmic, almost alive. She stepped past the debris and into the chamber, feeling the air shift around her like magnetic tension, adjusting to her presence. At the center of the room stood a cylindrical containment column, tall and silent. Its reinforced glass surface was fogged from the sudden exposure to open air. The attackers had not opened the column fully yet. They were still somewhere inside the chamber. The extraction team formed a protective arc behind her. They scanned the corners of the room, but the attackers were no longer visible. She could feel movement, not sound but pressure, as though someone had passed from one section of the chamber to another with practiced silence. She approached the containment column. Her reflection appeared faintly in the opaque glass. Then, a small blinking indicator at the base caught her attention. A blue light. The wrong color. The chamber was supposed to activate only under red code, triggered by top-level federal authorization. Blue meant something else entirely. Blue meant external override. She crouched beside the panel, examining the interface. The attackers had used a device she recognized instantly. A disruptive class frequency key. Illegal, unstable, and restricted to rogue actors who operated outside every recognized network. Whoever had taken control of the chamber had access to technology even Black Ops rarely encountered. She stood and turned toward the far wall. The hum in the chamber shifted, dropping into a lower register. It pulsed through the floor, vibrating the soles of her boots. The extraction team adjusted their stance. Something had changed in the containment system. The steam cleared, and the truth emerged. The attackers had not breached the chamber to steal something. They had activated it. A vertical panel in the far wall slid open with a hiss, revealing a narrow passageway previously hidden behind reinforced plating. The opening led into darkness, deeper and more controlled than the blackout upstairs. A faint metallic scent wafted from it, mixed with cold air that carried no trace of the facility's ventilation. She stepped closer. She knew what this was now. The hidden passage led to a secondary vault, a place only a handful of individuals inside the government were aware existed. A vault created not to store weapons, but to store information. Information too dangerous to exist anywhere except under the heaviest possible containment. The attackers were after data, but not ordinary data. They were after what the agency called deep archives. Files sealed decades ago, buried under clearance levels that never appeared on official charts. Files containing operations, experiments, and classified events that had once been erased from the public record. She moved toward the passage. A sudden shift in the air warned her of the approaching threat. She turned as a figure lunged from the shadows. It was one of the attackers, moving with desperate speed. He swung a compact device, its edge glowing with blue frequency light. The extraction team reacted instantly, intercepting him before he could reach her. They pinned him against the wall, but the man did not fight back. He pressed the device into the floor, triggering a blast of static that rippled through the chamber. The containment column flickered. The lights dimmed. The hum intensified until it became a low, vibrating roar. She recognized the danger at once. The attackers had not merely activated the vault. They had set a chain reaction in motion. The chamber was preparing to release everything stored within. She stepped back, calculating the seconds until the system reached full activation. Whatever lived inside the deep archive was about to surface, and stopping it would require confronting what the government had buried for decades. The roar deepened until it felt like the chamber itself was preparing to tear apart. Dust drifted from the ceiling in soft bursts that floated through the cold air. The containment column in the center vibrated with increasing intensity, its internal mechanisms spinning faster than the system was designed to handle. She watched the rising frequency levels on the embedded display, noting that each spike pushed the chamber closer to irreversible activation. The attacker pinned by the extraction team no longer struggled. He stared at her with something between certainty and resignation. His visor hid his expression, but his posture conveyed a truth she had seen many times. He believed he had completed his duty. Whatever damage he had set in motion was intentional. He had not come to escape. He had come to ensure the vault opened. She stepped toward him. The extraction team tightened their grip, bracing for resistance. But the attacker did not move, not even when she stopped inches from his face. She reached up and removed his visor. The man beneath was younger than she expected, with pale eyes that did not display fear or confusion. He looked at her as if he recognized her. That was impossible. Yet something in his stare suggested otherwise. She crouched slightly to examine the device he had used. The compact emitter pulsed with blue frequency energy, but its power core was nearly depleted. It had delivered its final charge into the containment system. The chain reaction underway was now self-sustaining. She stood and moved back toward the containment column. The cylindrical glass was beginning to clear as the internal frost melted away. She could see faint outlines inside. Not objects, not files, but something like shifting layers of embedded technology. The deep archive was never designed to store traditional information. It stored classified constructs, encrypted frameworks, and operational matrices capable of rebuilding entire data structures from fragments. The attackers were not trying to steal physical files. They were triggering access to the blueprint of operations, erased from official history. The hum intensified again. The light inside the column changed color, shifting from pale white to a deep, unnatural blue. The extraction team adjusted their stance. She raised a hand, signaling them to stay back. The pressure in the room thickened. The chamber's temperature dropped another few degrees. A thin line of frost spread across the floor from the base of the containment column. A metallic echo rang out from the newly opened passageway behind the far wall. Something shifted in the darkness beyond. She turned her head slightly, listening. The passage was not empty. Movement whispered through it, soft and deliberate. Someone else, or something else, had entered the vault before the attackers forced the chamber open. She moved toward the passage. The extraction team followed silently, their weapons drawn but steady. A faint light flickered inside the tunnel, irregular and cold. She stepped through the threshold, feeling the temperature drop even further. The air changed, heavy with a metallic tang that tasted like electricity. The tunnel walls were reinforced with older materials, steel alloys no longer used in modern facilities. Each panel carried etched markings, codes that resembled early-generation Black Ops encryption patterns. She traced one of the markings with her fingertips. It was not random. It was part of a lock sequence. The attackers had not guessed their way into the vault. They had followed a pattern they should not have known. The deeper she went, the stronger the sense of familiarity became. The architecture of the passage mirrored designs she had studied years earlier during training for operations that technically never existed. The vault had been created to store one specific construct, a construct so dangerous that even the agency responsible for designing it had erased its own documentation. A sudden ripple of blue light pulsed down the corridor. She stopped. The extraction team froze behind her. The light expanded, stretching across the walls before dissolving into the air. Activation sequence, she realized. The vault was waking up. She turned a corner and entered the secondary chamber. It was smaller than the main one, circular, with a raised platform at the center. On the platform stood a crystalline structure shaped like an angular lattice, glowing faintly with internal circuitry. This was the core of the Deep Archive, a construct capable of rebuilding entire classified histories from encrypted fragments. It could expose decades of operations buried by every branch of the government. And it was no longer dormant. The structure flickered. Lines of blue data ran across its surface. Each pulse released a faint ripple that shook the floor. The attackers were not stealing information. They were awakening something created to never be used again. She stepped toward the platform, feeling the weight of the truth settle around her. This was not just a breach. It was the resurrection of a classified ghost that the government had tried to erase. And stopping it would require confronting the very system she had once sworn to protect. The crystalline structure pulsed again, brighter this time, casting fractured blue reflections across the chamber walls. Each pulse vibrated through the floor, like a heartbeat, cold and mechanical. She stepped closer, analyzing the shifting patterns on the construct's surface. The pulses were not random. They followed a coded rhythm, a sequence designed to unlock layers of encrypted data buried within the lattice. The extraction team formed a perimeter, their visors adjusting to the fluctuating light. They remained silent, waiting for her assessment. She raised her hand, signaling them to hold position. Approaching the construct required precision. A miscalculation could accelerate the activation sequence, or worse, destabilize the entire chamber. She circled the platform slowly. Frost clung to the edges of the crystalline structure, spreading outward in thin branching lines. The temperature continued to fall. The air tasted sharp, metallic. She examined the control interface embedded at the base, noting the faint glow beneath the frost. The attackers had managed to initiate the activation, but the sequence was incomplete. They lacked one crucial element, the biometric signature required to unlock the deepest layer of the archive. Only one authorized operative carried that signature. Her. A faint echo drifted from the tunnel behind her. The extraction team shifted their stance. She turned but saw nothing. The sound repeated, softer this time, like footsteps attempting discretion. She recognized the pattern. Someone else was in the vault. Not an attacker. Not a technician. Someone familiar. She stepped away from the platform and moved toward the far wall. The blue light flickered again, revealing a shadow near the tunnel entrance. The extraction team aimed their weapons but did not fire. She signaled for restraint. The shadow separated from the darkness and stepped forward. It was the senior analyst from the operations hub, the one who had urged Rhodes to verify her clearance. His face was pale, illuminated by the residual blue glow. He looked shaken, but not injured. He carried no weapon. Instead, he held a small data module against his chest, cradling it like a fragile artifact. She studied him. He should not have been able to access the sublevels during the blackout. Yet he was here. Either he possessed clearance beyond what Rhodes realized, or someone had guided him. He approached carefully, aware of the extraction team's guns trained on him. His voice trembled when he spoke. He said he had followed a signal from the Deep Archive, a signal that activated after the chamber was breached. The data module in his hands contained fragments of information that had surfaced when the attackers triggered the initial override. He claimed the fragments were connected to her mission. She took the module, turning it over between her fingers. The casing was cold, almost painfully so. She inserted it into the auxiliary port on the construct's base. Blue data spiraled across the structure, reacting instantly. Lines of encrypted text flashed over the surface. She read them quickly. Some sequences were familiar. Others were fragments of operations she had only heard referenced in whispered training briefings. The archive was rebuilding itself, reconstructing classified history piece by piece. The analyst stepped back, overwhelmed by the display. He confessed that he had seen her name embedded in some of the reconstructed data. Not her active file. Something older, something buried. She kept her expression neutral, even as implications began to form in her mind. The crystalline structure pulsed again, stronger than before. The chamber trembled. A deep rumble echoed through the sublevels. The activation sequence was accelerating. She examined the new data shaping across the structure. A branching tree of encrypted pathways expanded upward, each node linking to another. The archive was not simply reconstructing information, it was preparing a full release. The extraction team shifted nervously. She understood why. A full release of deep archive data would devastate multiple intelligence agencies. It would expose covert operations, unauthorized programs, and hidden networks. The consequences would be catastrophic. She approached the structure again. She placed her hand near the biometric scanner, but did not activate it. She scanned the data one more time, searching for the attacker's ultimate objective. The encrypted fragments revealed only the beginning of a pattern, a hidden directive layered within the archive itself, a failsafe, something designed to awaken only when the archive was accessed under unauthorized conditions. The vault was not only releasing information, it was responding. A final line of data appeared on the crystalline surface. She read it, her eyes narrowing. The deep archive had identified a threat, and it had activated a protocol not seen in decades. Containment Level 0. Absolute elimination of hostile interference. She stepped back. The air grew colder. The structure brightened. The vault had determined that the attackers were not the only threat. The facility itself was now a target. And time was running out. The crystalline structure surged with a sudden burst of blue light that filled the chamber in a blinding flash. The extraction team shielded their visors. She did not move. The pulse washed over her like a cold wave, dissipating into the steel around them, before fading into faint lines of data still flickering across the structure's surface. When the light dimmed, the chamber felt heavier, as if the air itself had thickened in response to the activation of Containment Level 0. The extraction team stepped closer, awaiting her instructions. She kept her focus on the structure. Its internal lattice shifted, revealing deeper layers of encrypted data. The directive was clear. The archive was preparing to launch a destructive protocol designed to erase all unauthorized presence within the vault, the facility, and every connected network. The attackers had triggered something far beyond their control. She examined the shifting light, searching for a pattern she could interrupt. The archive's defense system was not simply a security measure. It was an autonomous intelligence embedded deep within the structure, one capable of evaluating threats and eliminating them without hesitation. The cold clarity of the protocol reflected the mindset of the generation that created it. They had built systems to protect secrets at any cost. Another tremor rippled through the chamber. The extraction team braced. Frost spread in branching lines across the floor. The hum grew louder, resonating through the walls. She knew the timeline was shrinking. Once Containment Level 0 completed its activation sequence, nothing inside the facility would be spared. Behind her, the senior analyst stepped forward cautiously. He pointed to a section of the crystalline lattice where the data pulses had begun to form a circular spiral. He said the pattern resembled a core access point. She looked closer. He was right. The spiral indicated the archive was building toward its final stage, preparing to release the destructive protocol. But something else caught her attention. The spiral contained a sublayer she recognized, a counter-sequence embedded long ago as a contingency. Only a handful of operatives had ever been trained to use it. She was one of them. She moved around the platform, tracing the data pattern with her eyes. She found the first anchor point, then the second. She memorized the third. The counter-sequence could interrupt the activation, but the timing needed to be exact. If she acted too early, the archive would reject the override. If she acted too late, the protocol would activate regardless. The extraction team watched as she examined the construct. She placed her hand near the biometric scanner, but did not touch it. Instead, she read the flickering symbols reflected across the crystal. The counter-sequence required both an external signal and a biometric trigger, aligned within a 3-second window. It was designed to test the reflexes and judgment of the operative attempting the override. Failure meant permanent lockdown. The hum intensified. The chamber lights dimmed again. Frost crawled up the walls. She took a slow breath. She could feel the facility shifting under her feet. The attackers were still somewhere in the sublevels, perhaps unaware that containment level 0 would eliminate them as easily as it would destroy the facility. The senior analyst asked a question, his voice shaking. She raised her hand slightly, signaling for silence. She needed complete focus. She prepared her stance, aligning herself with the scanner and the core of the construct. The crystalline lattice brightened, growing hotter despite the surrounding cold. Energy surged through the room. She waited. The spiral pattern accelerated. The hum reached a higher frequency. The chamber vibrated. She studied the intervals between pulses. 3 seconds remained between the final activation step and the release of the protocol. That was the moment she needed. The spiral flickered. She moved. Her hand struck the biometric scanner at the exact instant the spiral emitted its strongest pulse. The extraction team tensed. The chamber lights flared. The crystalline structure reacted, freezing mid-pulse. A sudden silence engulfed the room, sharp and unnatural. The lattice shimmered. Data reformed. Lines of blue light converged on the scanner beneath her hand. She felt the resistance of the archive as it evaluated her credentials. The structure pulsed once. Then again. She held her breath. A final pulse radiated outward. Then the hum stopped. The frost on the floor halted its spread. The chamber light steadied. The destructive protocol froze mid-sequence, suspended between activation and shutdown. She stepped back. The archive had paused, not ended. Paused. Containment level 0 was not cancelled. It awaited further instruction. The extraction team exhaled in relief. But she knew the truth. The threat was not over. The archive had accepted her biometric override. Now it would expect her to decide the fate of the facility. And beyond the chamber walls, the attackers were still moving. The next decision would determine whether the deep archive remained a sleeping ghost, or whether it woke fully. The silence inside the vault felt sharper than the roar that had filled it minutes earlier. The crystalline structure stood frozen in mid-activation, suspended between survival and destruction. The extraction team waited behind her with disciplined stillness, aware that a single miscalculation could restart the sequence they had narrowly interrupted. She studied the faint flicker of light trapped inside the lattice, observing the subtle movements that revealed the archive had not fully surrendered. It was assessing, watching, waiting for her next command. She stepped around the platform while the internal system stabilized. The air remained cold, but its bite had softened. Frost clung to the walls in uneven patterns, evidence of the energy spent during the near activation. The senior analyst stood near the tunnel entrance, pale and tense, clutching the railing as if trying to process the magnitude of what stood before him. He kept his distance, understanding that any interference could trigger a cascade. She exhaled slowly. The biometric override had stopped the protocol, but it had not resolved the threat. Containment level 0 remained active beneath the surface, a dormant weapon poised to destroy the facility if triggered again. The attackers were still inside the complex. They had opened a vault they should never have known existed. The archive had responded by preparing to erase everything. And now its attention rested on her, the one person with clearance high enough to complete or cancel the protocol. Another faint vibration traveled through the steel floor. She turned toward the tunnel. The extraction team shifted into position. Someone approached. Not hurried, not stealthy. Confident steps. A silhouette emerged from the shadows. It was Rhodes. His uniform was disheveled. Sweat streaked his face. His eyes darted around the vault, widening as he took in the crystalline structure, the frost, the extraction team, and her presence at the platform's center. He raised his weapon, confusion overtaking his expression. He demanded answers, insisting the entire situation had been caused by her. He accused her of collaborating with the attackers, of triggering the blackout, of breaching the facility. His voice trembled with desperation, the desperation of a man realizing he had been catastrophically wrong. She did not respond. She watched him with an expression devoid of reaction, as calm as the frozen lattice beside her. Rhodes gestured wildly at the crystalline structure, demanding that the extraction team arrest her. The operatives did not move. Their silence struck him harder than any weapon. He screamed at them, but their discipline held. They no longer recognized Rhodes's authority. Their chain of command ended with her. The archive reacted to Rhodes's raised voice. The crystalline lattice flickered. A pulse of blue light traveled across its surface. The hum returned in a faint, low vibration. The structure sensed conflict. Threat assessment routines began to stir. She stepped closer to the scanner, ready to intervene if necessary. But Rhodes misinterpreted her movement. He believed she intended to activate the archive. In a panic, he fired. The shot echoed through the chamber like a violent crack, ricocheting off steel. The extraction team moved instantly, intercepting the bullet before it reached her. Sparks burst across the floor. Rhodes stumbled backward as one operative disarmed him with swift efficiency. His weapon clattered across the steel grate. He fell to his knees, gasping, realizing too late that he had triggered something far beyond his understanding. The crystalline structure reacted to the gunshot. Its internal circuitry brightened. A pulse surged outward. Frost cracked beneath her feet. The hum deepened. Containment level 0 was seconds from resuming. She placed her hand on the scanner. The structure froze again. The chamber stilled. The frost stopped spreading. She held her hand in place until the lattice dimmed. Rhodes watched her, eyes wide, chest heaving. He finally understood the truth. She was not the threat. She was the only reason the facility still existed. She stepped away from the scanner and turned toward him. Rhodes lowered his head. His voice broke as he tried to justify his decisions. He claimed he had followed protocol, that he had acted to protect the facility. She listened without comment. He had never understood the weight of command, the responsibility of knowing when to act and when to see beyond fear. She instructed the extraction team to escort Rhodes out of the vault. They obeyed immediately. The senior analyst followed them, shaken but unharmed. She remained alone with the crystalline archive. The lattice shimmered softly, as if acknowledging her presence. The vault waited for her final command. She assessed the data, the directives, the consequences. Then she placed her hand on the scanner one last time. This time she issued a shutdown. The crystalline structure dimmed. The hum faded. The frost melted. The vault powered down layer by layer until only a faint glow remained at its core. The threat was contained. For now. She stepped back, evaluating the silence. The deep archive was no longer awake, but its memory endured. And so did the knowledge that someone had tried to resurrect it. That meant this was not the end. It was the beginning of a larger conflict. One only she was prepared to face. The vault settled into a heavy stillness as the crystalline structure powered down, each fading pulse marking the slow retreat of a threat that had nearly consumed the facility. The frost on the floor thinned into puddles that reflected the dim light lingering inside the chamber. She waited until the final indicator dimmed before stepping away, her movements measured, ensuring no residual signal remained active. Containment level 0 was dormant, but its shadow pressed against the edges of the silence. She listened to the retreating footsteps of the extraction team, escorting Rhodes and the senior analyst back toward the upper levels. Their echoes vanished into the tunnel, leaving her alone with the deep archive. The chamber's cold began to ease, replaced by the faint warmth of restored airflow. Backup systems were attempting to reclaim control of the sublevels. She knew the process would take time. The breach had penetrated too deeply to be resolved with simple resets. She turned and surveyed the chamber again. Though the crystalline lattice slept, she sensed the residue of its activation. The vault's walls still carried thin lines of frost where energy had surged. The air held the metallic scent of recently engaged systems. And the floor showed traces of the attacker's movements, faint disturbances that marked the path of an infiltration executed with precision. She stepped toward the tunnel. The vault was secure for now, but the larger issue remained unresolved. The attackers had known exactly where to strike, exactly how to bypass layers of security, and exactly what would trigger the archive. That knowledge could not have come from outside the government. Someone with exceptional clearance had provided them with information buried too deeply to access from any surface-level breach. She ascended the steps out of the vault and entered the tunnel. The metal walls vibrated slightly as emergency power restored limited functionality. Distant alarms began to activate again, soft and unfocused, signaling attempts to reboot systems that had been forcibly shut down. She moved through the tunnel with the calm efficiency of someone cataloging every detail for later analysis. At the main sublevel landing, she paused. A newly formed crack traced along one wall, where the containment blast had rippled upward. The structure had absorbed the shock, but the fault line confirmed how close the facility had come to destruction. She ran her fingertips along the fracture. It was superficial, but its presence was a warning. The next attempt might not be. She climbed to the next level. Ahead, she could hear Rhodes's strained voice echoing from the corridor. His words were frantic, defensive, an attempt to explain his actions to the senior analyst who had witnessed every failure. She approached, but did not reveal herself. She listened. Rhodes insisted he had followed protocol. He claimed the situation had escalated beyond anyone's capacity to control. He blamed the blackout, the attackers, the system malfunctions. Everything except his own refusal to verify her clearance. The senior analyst's reply was quiet, but firm. He stated that Rhodes's decisions had directly facilitated the breach. The delay in recognizing her authority had jeopardized the entire facility. Rhodes tried to argue, but his voice cracked under the weight of the truth. She stepped into view. Rhodes fell silent instantly. The extraction team surrounding him stiffened, awaiting her direction. She regarded Rhodes with the same steady expression she had carried in the vault. He cast his eyes downward. She said nothing. There was nothing meaningful to say. His choices had nearly cost the facility its existence. She instructed the extraction team to continue escorting Rhodes to a holding area pending investigation. They moved without hesitation. The senior analyst remained behind, watching her with a mixture of respect and unease. He gestured towards the upper levels and said the system logs were beginning to rebuild. He offered to retrieve whatever fragments he could. She nodded once. They ascended together through dim corridors, lit only by intermittent emergency lights. The facility felt hollow, stripped of the constant hum of active systems. Teams of agents moved through the hallways in hurried formations, attempting to restore order without understanding what they had narrowly escaped. When she reached the operations hub, she paused at the entrance. The room was dark, but flickering back to life. Screens rebooted one at a time. Static crawled across displays before system maps emerged in fractured forms. Agents froze when they saw her, recognizing her authority, now that the chaos had settled. She approached the central console. The senior analyst accessed the restored logs. Lines of fragmented data streamed across the screen. Patterns, commands, unauthorized access points, and embedded within them, a series of encrypted signatures. She leaned closer. Someone had erased their trail. Someone with clearance equal to her own. She straightened, the weight of the revelation settling quietly across her shoulders. The attackers had not acted alone. They had been guided by someone who understood the archive as deeply as she did. The breach had not been an attack. It had been a test. And whoever had orchestrated it was still out there, waiting for her to respond. The operations hub slowly regained its shape as more systems powered back online. Screens illuminated in staggered rows, casting sharp rectangles of light across the darkened room. Agents moved with quiet urgency, still shaken by the blackout, their voices low and cautious. She stood at the center, analyzing the recovered data as the fragmented logs assembled themselves line by line. The senior analyst hovered nearby, monitoring the restoration process. The console beeped softly. A new set of entries appeared, heavily corrupted but partially readable. The timestamps aligned with the exact moments the attackers bypassed the facility's defenses. Their movements were too coordinated to have been improvised. Each bypass corresponded to a clearance level that should not have been accessible. She scrolled through the data slowly, her eyes narrowing with each sequence she decoded. A pattern emerged. Someone had systematically disabled alarms moments before each breach point. Someone with intimate understanding of the facility's hidden architecture. Someone who knew where the deep archive was located, even though its existence was buried under layers of obsolete classifications. The senior analyst approached with hesitation. He pointed to a specific entry, a signature embedded deep inside the corrupted data. It flickered across the screen like a ghost imprint. The analyst explained that the signature did not match any attacker. It belonged to an internal profile, but the system identified it only as a shadow clearance, a clearance level that no longer officially existed. She recognized the structure of the signature, not the identity itself, but the type of encryption used. It was the same classification she had worked under during her earliest years in Black Ops, long before her current operational directives. The discovery tightened something in her chest, not panic, but recognition. Someone with her training had orchestrated the breach. She stepped away from the console and surveyed the room. The agents continued their work, unaware of the implication forming in her mind. The senior analyst studied her, waiting for direction. She asked him how much of the signature could be recovered. He replied that most of it was irretrievable, overwritten by an external key with precision that suggested deliberate masking. Only one fragment remained intact. She asked to see it. The analyst hesitated. The fragment contained a personal identifier, but it was incomplete. He loaded it onto the screen. A string of numbers appeared, broken and incomplete, followed by a single initial, C. She stared at it in silence. Memories she had buried long ago stirred beneath the surface of her calm. C was not a code name. It was the first letter of a designation once used within a small circle of operatives trained under a classified program. A program that had been terminated after a catastrophic mission that left most of its members dead. Most, but not all. She stepped back from the console. The analyst watched her, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. She instructed him to continue rebuilding the logs and to alert her if anything else emerged connected to the shadow clearance. She left the operations hub. The corridor outside was dim, lit by emergency strips that still struggled to regain full brightness. She walked slowly, absorbing the faint tremors in the facility's structure as systems recalibrated. Her footsteps echoed softly, steady despite the weight settling over her mind. She remembered the program that once used the designation C. Its operatives had been created for missions that demanded absolute control, adaptability, and anonymity. They had been erased from records, not because they failed, but because they achieved too much. After the program's termination, survivors had been reassigned or quietly removed from active service. But one operative had vanished. One with skills identical to hers. One who understood the deep archive as intimately as she did. She descended the stairwell towards the secure levels, her pace measured. She needed to see the vault one more time before the facility returned to full function. She needed to confirm whether the archive had recorded anything beyond the visible logs. At the threshold of the sub-level corridor, she paused. A faint vibration traveled through the walls, different from the system tremor she had grown accustomed to throughout the night. This vibration was controlled, subtle, like the footsteps of someone trying not to be heard. She turned her head slowly. At the far end of the corridor, a shadow slipped out of view. Not an agent, not an attacker. Someone who moved with the precision of training that mirrored her own. She stepped forward, silent and alert. The shadow did not reappear, but the meaning was unmistakable. This was no longer a breach to contain. This was a message. A survivor of the same program she once served had resurfaced, and the deep archive was only the first step in whatever they intended to unleash. She straightened, her expression steady. The conflict she feared had begun, and this time, the enemy was someone who understood her better than anyone alive. The corridor remained still for several seconds after the shadow disappeared, as if the facility itself held its breath. She stood motionless, listening to the faint vibrations lingering in the walls. These were not random system fluctuations. They carried intention, weight, familiar precision. Whoever had moved through the hallway knew exactly where to place their steps to avoid detection. It was the technique she had learned long ago, perfected through years of classified operations. She moved forward with slow, deliberate steps, tracing the path the shadow had taken. The lights overhead flickered unevenly. The emergency power grid still worked in fragments, unable to fully stabilize after the blackout. The corridor's silence pressed around her, broken only by the soft hum of distant machinery struggling to reboot. When she reached the end of the hall, she paused. There was no sign of forced entry, no tampered panels, no disturbed dust on the steel floor. The shadow had vanished without a trace. She examined the corner where the figure had disappeared, running her hand along the cold surface. The metal held no heat signatures. Whoever had stood here had moved on quickly. She turned back toward the sublevels. Her instincts urged her deeper, but she resisted the impulse. A direct pursuit would reveal too much. Whoever followed her movements would expect that. This was not an attacker fleeing capture. This was an operative issuing a challenge. A reminder that she was no longer the only one who carried the training of a program erased from history. She ascended to the next level, where agents work to restore network nodes. Their voices were subdued. Even those not privy to the vault's secrets understood that the facility had come close to collapse. She passed them without addressing their uncertain glances. Her focus remained on the silent message hidden within the shadow's movements. The senior analyst approached from a nearby terminal. He updated her on the system's restoration, explaining that deeper logs were reconstructing more slowly. He carried a folder of printed fragments. He offered it to her with trembling hands. She scanned the papers quickly. Most were corrupted beyond use, but one fragment stood out. A timestamp, a clearance signature, and a single line of text. Protocol Echo initiated. The analyst asked what it meant. She did not answer. She folded the paper and slipped it into her jacket. Echo was not a standard protocol. It was a silent directive tied to the same program that had trained her. It had been designed as a contingency measure for operatives who went dark but remained active without authorization. Echo was not a recall. It was a warning, a signal that a rogue operative had begun moving. She asked the analyst whether the system had identified the location from which the signal originated. He hesitated, then shook his head. The fragment had appeared only for a fraction of a second before being overwritten by an external key. She dismissed him quietly and left the hub. Her steps carried her to the secure elevator, where she keyed in a classification level few remaining operatives even knew existed. The elevator responded immediately, its old mechanical system groaning to life. As the doors slid shut, she felt the shift in pressure as it descended. The walls vibrated with unstable energy, a reminder of how close the facility came to annihilation. When the elevator opened, she stepped into a small chamber used decades earlier for high-clearance mission planning. Dust coated the long table in the center. Old monitors flickered with static. The air smelled of rust and disuse. The room had not been touched in years. Yet someone had been here recently. A single chair had been moved, not by accident, but by intent. She approached it slowly. On the table, where the dust had been disturbed, lay a small object, a metal disc, plain, polished, empty. But she knew its meaning immediately. It was a calling token used by her former program, left only for someone who would understand. She picked it up. It was warm. Someone had placed it there minutes earlier. She closed her fist around the token. A memory surfaced. A briefing room similar to this one. Operatives lined in silence. The program director presenting two paths, loyalty to command or loyalty to survival. Only a handful had chosen the latter. One of them had vanished shortly after. Designation: C, a survivor. A ghost. A weapon without restraint. She opened her hand and stared at the token. This was the beginning of a hunt. Not for an enemy who wanted destruction, but for a rival who understood her strengths, her weaknesses, and her methods. A rival trained to anticipate every move she made. She stepped back toward the elevator, the token still in her hand. The air around her felt colder. He was challenging her to find him, to stop him, to choose whether she would uphold the system that had created both of them. When the elevator doors closed, she understood the truth. This conflict would not be resolved inside the facility. It had already moved beyond it. And she was the only one capable of following him into the shadows he had chosen. She remained silent as the elevator rose towards the upper levels, the metal disc still warm in her palm. The token's weight felt heavier than its size justified. It was not a threat, it was an invitation. A signal left only for someone trained to understand its message. The rogue operative who once shared her program had resurfaced with purpose, and his reappearance meant the breach at the facility was not the objective, but the opening move. The elevator doors slid open into a dim corridor, where agents moved in controlled disarray. They carried damaged equipment, replaced shattered panels, and attempted to stabilize systems that resisted repair. She passed through them without interruption. Their sidelong glances revealed uncertainty. They recognized her authority, but they did not understand the deeper conflict unfolding behind the surface. The senior analyst ran toward her, breathless, holding another data fragment. He said the system had restored 3 seconds of footage from a disabled camera in the lower sublevels. It was incomplete, corrupted, but it captured a silhouette moving with extraordinary precision. The analyst looked shaken. The figure did not match any known profile. It moved like someone trained outside the boundaries of standard agencies. She viewed the footage. A figure with controlled, deliberate posture. A brief outline, then static. She recognized the gait instantly, a style taught in the same program that had shaped her foundation. The rogue operative who used the initial C was not hiding. He was leaving traces on purpose. Echo Protocol had been activated, and now he was revealing himself step by step. The analyst asked who the silhouette belonged to. She told him only that the threat was internal and required classification beyond his clearance. He nodded, uneasy but obedient. She instructed him to continue recovering system footage from the attack, even the corrupted fragments. Somewhere in the chaos lay the pattern the rogue operative wanted her to follow. She continued down the hall towards the temporary command room that had replaced the damaged hub. The facility director stood at the center, speaking with a cluster of shaken agents. Her presence shifted the atmosphere instantly. Conversations halted. The director dismissed the others and faced her with a grave expression. He asked what had happened in the vault. She replied with only the necessary facts. The breach had been contained, the deep archive secured, the destructive protocol neutralized. He asked about Rhodes. She said Rhodes was stable, but compromised by his own decisions. Disciplinary review was underway. The director lowered his voice. He said the attackers had not entered the facility through any known access point. Their infiltration route remained a mystery, and no external scans detected approaching aircraft or vehicles. Whoever orchestrated the breach had bypassed every surveillance layer without detection. He asked whether she believed foreign involvement was possible. She told him no. This was domestic, internal. Someone with training equal to, or surpassing hers. The director's expression shifted subtly, as though he had already suspected this. He admitted there had been whispers of a ghost operative resurfacing, a relic of an old program that had once operated without oversight. Reports had circulated, unverified, of classified technologies reappearing on black markets. He asked whether she knew the operative. She did not lie. She said yes. The director inhaled slowly. He understood the weight of that answer. He asked whether the operative was after the deep archive. She replied that the vault was only the beginning. Whatever the rogue operative intended required more than data. It required exposure, disruption, and above all, a response from her. He asked for the operative's identity. She did not answer. Instead, she handed him the warm metal disc. The director studied it with confusion. He asked what it meant. She told him it was not a threat, but a summons, a signal reserved for a confrontation outside the facility's jurisdiction. The disc carried no identifying marks, but the director felt its significance. He asked where she believed the operative would strike next. She replied that he had already chosen the battlefield. Not here, Not underground. Outside. Where protocols no longer applied. The director asked what she needed. She requested limited operational autonomy, off-record clearance, and a single extraction team to remain on standby, but out of sight. The director hesitated only briefly before agreeing. The situation demanded expertise that only she possessed. She left the command room and walked through the facility one last time. The damage was significant, but contained. Agents worked tirelessly to restore order. Lights flickered but stabilized. The deep archive slept below, unaware of the threat awakening beyond its walls. At the main exit, she paused. A cold breeze drifted in through the cracked doorway. On the ground outside lay a single footprint in the dust. Not from an agent, not from emergency personnel. From someone who knew she would find it. A message written in silence. She stepped into the night, the metal disc in her hand. The hunt had officially begun. The night stretched across the landscape like a vast, silent field, broken only by the faint wind that carried dust across the concrete steps outside the facility. She paused at the threshold, letting the cold air settle against her face. The single footprint ahead of her was angled towards the road, pointing away from the facility and into unmarked territory. It was not a clue left by mistake. It was deliberate, a breadcrumb meant for her alone. She moved forward with controlled steps. The extraction team remained out of sight as instructed, positioned several miles away under blackout protocols. She wanted no interference. The rogue operative who once shared her training would expect her to come alone. Anything else would risk provoking him into disappearing again. The facility's exterior lights flickered weakly behind her. Emergency drones hovered overhead, scanning the perimeter for threats. But the true danger was already gone, leaving only silence in its wake. She reached the end of the concrete and stepped into the gravel that lined the access road. The footprint faded into the loose stones, but she no longer needed a trail. She knew his pattern, knew how he would move, knew where he would wait. A distant shape emerged across the barren stretch of land, not moving, simply watching. She stopped. The figure did not advance. It stood half-lit by the glow of a failing perimeter floodlight, posture straight, hands at his sides. She recognized him instantly, even though distance obscured every detail. His stance carried the unmistakable discipline of their former program. She walked forward. He remained still. When she reached a safe distance, she did not speak. Neither did he. Their silence was a language of its own, shaped by missions carried out in shadows no longer recorded by the systems that once commanded them. The wind shifted. Dust swept between them. He raised a hand slowly, not a threat, a gesture of acknowledgement, a greeting only one of their program would recognize. It translated to a simple message. "You found me." She waited. He lowered his hand and stepped closer into the half-light. His face was partly shadowed, but the sharpness of his features revealed the erosion of years spent off-grid. His eyes remained precise, aware, calculating. He carried no visible weapon. He did not need one. His presence alone was a weapon created by training designed to erase softness from human instinct. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady, as though they were colleagues meeting after a long absence. He told her the breach had been necessary. The archive had been dormant too long. Buried knowledge had consequences. He claimed the system they served had become blind, weakened by its own layers of bureaucracy and denial. He said change was inevitable, and he intended to accelerate it. She listened without reaction. He explained that the deep archive held more than history. It held the blueprint for failures repeated by agencies that refused accountability. He believed exposure was the only way to prevent a cycle of corruption and secrecy. He believed she, above anyone, would understand. She asked how many had helped him. His eyes did not shift. He said fewer than she thought, but more than she feared. He said the breach was not designed to destroy the facility, but to reveal its vulnerabilities. He said the protocol she had stopped was meant to demonstrate the danger of their government's forgotten designs. She stepped closer, her expression unchanged. She told him he nearly triggered a catastrophic event that would have erased the facility, its personnel, and the archive itself. He countered that catastrophes were sometimes the only catalyst for transformation. The wind cut through the silence again. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black case. He placed it on the ground between them. He said it contained evidence of deeper corruption, rooted in the same program that trained them both. Evidence he claimed she would need when the system inevitably turned against itself. She did not pick it up. He stepped back. His posture shifted subtly. A withdrawal, not surrender. Before fading into the darkness, he said one more thing. That the next step was hers. That he would not hide. That she would know where to find him when she was ready. Then he disappeared into the night with the same precision as the shadow she had seen inside the facility. She remained alone on the barren ground, the black case at her feet. The facility lights flickered behind her, steadying now that the system survived the breach. She crouched and opened the case. Inside, documents and encrypted drives glinted under the thin moonlight. If real, they would unravel everything the government believed stable. She closed the case and stood. The night was silent again. The hunt was not ending. It was evolving. She walked back toward the facility, the case in her hand, knowing the truth that settled like a shadow against her spine. This conflict had no clear sides, only choices. And she was now the axis on which the next chapter would turn.